Edward had always admired engineering achievements, so flying his drone over the dam, he couldn't help but admire it. 5 minutes later, he makes a shocking discovery. Edward Wilson has been fascinated by the power and grandeur of dams for as long as he can remember. There was something awe-inspiring about the massive structures holding back tons of water, inspiring both fear and respect. So, on a clear Saturday morning, he put his drone in a bag with gear and set off for a few hours to one of the tallest dams in the country. It was a miracle of modern engineering. It was his first visit to the dam, and he couldn't wait to capture its scale and beauty from a unique bird's-eye view. Little did he know that he was about to make a shocking discovery. Arriving at the place, when the sun began to rise higher and higher, Edward parked the car on the observation deck, from where he had a view of the dam. The air was fresh, and a light breeze carried the faint scent of pine trees. A dam stretched beneath him like a concrete monolith, separating the calm reservoir from the bubbling river below. Edward admired the scene for a few moments, but the excitement of launching his drone quickly took over. His wife, Catherine, did not understand his passion but supported him in this. He could never find words to describe how much he admired engineering developments, or how he admired how they could hold back tons of water, protecting communities from flooding or providing hydroelectric power. He's always been something of an engineering geek, and dams were his main passion. This dam must have been one of the most impressive he had ever seen. He found a flat clearing nearby, unpacked his gear, and turned on his state-of-the-art drone. The drone he bought specifically for such adventures. It cost him several months of savings and several reasoned arguments with Catherine. But in the end, he convinced her that it was worth investing money for such moments. To tell the truth, she didn't quite understand what it was, but she respected his passion and knew how much it meant to him. The device came to life, its propellers spinning faster until it rose gracefully into the air. Here. Edward set up his controller and pointed the drone over the dam, the camera transmitting a crystal-clear picture to his tablet. The view was breathtaking. A shimmering blue reservoir on one side, a dense forest surrounding the river on the other, and a massive concrete wall between them. He couldn't take his eyes off the images. It was an amazing sight, and he wondered to himself why it had taken him so long to come here. Edward spent the first few minutes taking detailed pictures of the dam, enlarging the details of its construction, and mentally noting what he had seen before on other dams and what was unique to this structure. As he flew the drone closer to the middle of the reservoir, something unusual caught his attention on the live broadcast. It was a small barge floating near the dam's spillway. In fact, there was nothing strange about this, given that barges and speedboats were constantly plying the waterways, except that the barge seemed abandoned. There were no workers in sight, and the ship was not moving. It seemed strange to Edward, but he ignored it, suggesting that it might be part of the ongoing renovation work. He assumed that it was not a pleasure boat, given its location and the fact that there was no one around. His curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to lower the drone down to take a closer look at it. The drone descended smoothly, the camera focused on the battered deck of the barge. It was a very old boat that seemed to be in need of some repairs. It was completely different from the well-maintained vessels he was used to seeing. Suddenly, Edward noticed something unusual. The barge was piled high with large, heavy crates held together with ropes. His heart began to beat faster. The boxes were hastily arranged as if someone had thrown them there in a hurry, either wanting to get rid of them or not wanting anyone to see them lying there. Something tightened in his chest. Why would someone leave such a valuable-looking cargo unattended on a barge so close to the dam? It just didn't make sense, and suddenly something didn't feel quite right. Edward flew the drone around the barge, hoping to find some more clues about what kind of cargo it was or who might have dropped it. He aimed the camera so as to capture every detail, not wanting to miss anything. Any small anomaly could be a clue, and although he wasn't sure why at the moment, it seemed important to gather all the possible details. He zoomed in on the boxes, trying to make out any inscriptions, but they were empty. The eerie silence on the barge, combined with the mysterious cargo, made him think. He decided to launch a drone over the spillway to see if there was anything else unusual there. As the drone hovered over the edge of the dam, Edward noticed something even more disturbing. The metal grate, which was supposed to be securely bolted to one of the spillway channels, was slightly ajar, as if someone had hacked it. The opening was wide enough for a man to slip through. Edward's hands tightened on the control panel. It wasn't just weird, it was completely suspicious. Suspicious. He looked around, but there was no one else in sight. However, he had a very unpleasant feeling right now, but he continued to investigate. 5 minutes later, Edward made a shocking discovery that made his blood run cold. The drone's camera recorded movement under the surface of the water next to the barge. At first it looked like ripples caused by the wind, but the pattern was too clear. Edward adjusted the drone's position to get a better view. Then he saw it. A barely discernible dark figure was moving underwater. She was big, much more than any fish or natural object. His stomach twisted as the shadow became clearer, revealing what looked like mechanical components glinting in the sunlight filtering through the water. "What the hell is this?" Edward muttered to himself, without taking his eyes off the screen and shaking his head from side to side, as if this could help him understand what he was looking at. The shadow moved purposefully, skirting the barge before disappearing into the depths next to the open grate of the spillway. Edward was feverishly going over the possible options in his mind. Was it some kind of underwater drone, part of the mechanism, or something else entirely? It didn't matter which way he looked at it. He couldn't figure out what it was. However, he just had an inner feeling that this shouldn't be the case. Edward's initial excitement turned to fear. He decided it was time to notify the authorities. There was no such thing as an overreaction when it came to something like this. If something had happened to the dam, it would have been a disaster. If something damaged the dam, then a huge amount of water, sediment, and debris would flood the rivers and ecosystems downstream. Switching the drone to hover mode, he grabbed his phone and dialed the number of the local ranger station. While the call was going on, Edward was watching the live broadcast. The shadow disappeared, but the image of its smooth mechanical shape was imprinted in his mind. "Hello, this is Officer Sylvester speaking," a gruff voice replied. Edward quickly explained what he had seen: an abandoned barge, strange boxes, a loose spillway grate, and a dark figure underwater. Sylvester listened intently, and with every detail his tone became more serious. By the end of Edward's story, the officer was also worried about what this man and his drone might have stumbled upon. "Okay, stay where you are," the ranger said. "I'll send a team to check it out. But I need you to be safe and keep your drone in the air if possible. Keep an eye on the situation and let us know if anything changes." Edward agreed, his heart racing as he ended the conversation. A part of him thought he might be overreacting, that the ranger should know everything about the dam, but the fact that he seemed very worried and was sending a command made Edward panic even more. He steered the drone back to the barge, checking for any signs of movement. Now the water was motionless, and the sky was reflected in its surface, as in a mirror. But the silence seemed ominous, as if something was waiting just below the surface. He ordered the ranger team to rush over to him, just so he wouldn't feel like he was dealing with this, whatever it was, all by himself. Minutes passed, and Edward noticed a parking attendant's truck pulling into the observation deck parking lot. 2 rangers armed with binoculars and walkie-talkies got out of it. He waved at them and showed them a live broadcast from his drone. The rangers exchanged worried glances as they scanned the footage. They looked at each other, but neither of them seemed to have an answer to the question of what they were looking at. "We'll need to take a closer look," one of them said. They decided to launch a small boat from a nearby pier to inspect the barge. Edward offered to hold his drone in the air to provide a bird's-eye view as they approached. That way, everything was under control, and everyone could be as safe as possible. At least he hoped so. The ranger's boat cut through the water, approaching the barge. Edward's drone recorded every moment. The camera followed their progress. When they reached the barge, one of the rangers secured the boat while the other climbed aboard. Edward watched as the ranger carefully examined the boxes. Suddenly, the ranger froze and then waved frantically at his partner. Edward instantly realized that the ranger had seen something disturbing. "What's happening?" Edward muttered, turning the drone's camera for a better view. The ranger on the barge seemed to be shouting something, but the sound couldn't be heard in the distance. A few moments later, he opened one of the drawers, revealing its contents. It was something Edward couldn't even imagine. As he set off that morning, he imagined a pleasant, relaxing day. But not that. His jaw dropped as the clear image on the tablet left no doubt about what the Rangers had discovered. The box was filled with explosives, industrial charges to which timers were attached. Edward screamed. His breathing became ragged as panic set in. The realization of what was in the crates hit him like the impact of a freight train. Someone had planted explosives on the barge, and they were dangerously close to the dam. The Rangers began to act, calling for reinforcements by radio and evacuating the area near the dam. Edward's hands were shaking as he guided the drone to the scene. Edward's mind was full of questions. Who could have done this and why? As if in response, the shadow appeared in the water again, this time moving towards the Rangers' boat. Edward's heart was racing as he adjusted the drone's altitude to get a better view. The mechanical figure surfaced for a moment, revealing what looked like an elegant underwater robot equipped with manipulators. He dived again, heading straight for the barge. Suddenly, it dawned on Edward what kind of underwater drone it was, what it meant there. Someone was nearby, controlling it and watching everything that was happening. A shiver ran down his spine. There was a good chance that whoever was flying the underwater drone had also seen Edward flying his craft. He felt very uncomfortable at the thought of being watched, especially by someone who was ready to cause such destruction. "Caution!" Edward instinctively shouted, even though he knew they couldn't hear him. The Rangers seemed to notice the commotion on the water, their heads turned towards the ripples. One of them grabbed a pole from the boat and started poking it into the water next to the barge, trying to ward off the approaching figure. Before the underwater drone could reach the barge, it suddenly turned to the side and disappeared into the depths again. Edward exhaled shakily, his pulse racing. A few moments later, a large group of rescuers arrived, including bomb disposal specialists and divers. The area was cordoned off, and as a result, coordinated efforts were made to neutralize the threat. Edward desperately wanted to tell them that whoever was responsible for this must be nearby, and they should also send a team to find this man, but he was too far away to pass on the message. Edward landed his drone to drain the battery, but remained on the observation deck, watching the operation. Fortunately, one of the divers seemed to recognize the craft immediately, and a small group of Rangers set off in a different direction, no doubt in search of the man who was operating it. Hours passed while rescuers worked to safely remove the explosives and disable the underwater drone. By the time the sun began to set, the immediate danger had been neutralized, but many questions remained unanswered. Later that evening, Officer Sylvester approached Edward and thanked him for his vigilance. "You may have saved a dam and a lot of lives today," the ranger said. "We still don't know who's behind this or what they were planning, but we'll get to the bottom of it." He asked Edward to send a copy of the video for analysis. There was a chance that it might contain something they had missed, and Officer Sylvester was eager to do his best in this case. Edward nodded, the weight of the day's events weighing heavily on his shoulders. As he packed up his equipment and prepared to leave, he took one last look back at the dam. The massive structure stood firm, its imposing appearance a reminder of both its power and vulnerability. Edward knew he would never look at him or his drone the same way again. How would he even begin to explain to Catherine what he was involved in? A silly infatuation led to something important. His drone footage was vital to the investigation. He didn't even want to think about what might have happened if he hadn't been flying his drone over the dam at the very moment it happened. Edward took one last look at the drone, realizing that the high price was a small price to pay for the lives he might have just saved. Returning home in the gathering dusk, Edward replayed the events of the day in his head. The mystery of the barge, explosives, and a strange underwater drone is likely to haunt him for a long time, or at least until Officer Sylvester gets more answers. But one thing was for sure. His decision to fly his drone over the dam that morning changed everything. If he hadn't made the shocking discovery, there would most likely have been a major disaster. He just hoped that Officer Sylvester and his team would catch the culprit before another incident occurred in which luck would not be on their side. Now it's up to you. What do you think about this story? Do you know any stories in which dams have burst? We would like to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.